Welcome to Kerri Arsenault. She is a native of Mexico, Maine, but like she said, she's currently living in Connecticut. Her website says she's had too many jobs to count, 86 when she counted them the last time. But currently she's a contributing editor at Orion Magazine and a humanities associate at Harvard, which we were just talking about isn't as prestigious as, not prestigious, but it isn't exactly what it sounds like.
It's a job, not a job, an associate.
Yeah. Most importantly, she is the author of Milltown, Reckoning with What Remains, which was the winner of the Rachel Carson Environment Book Award, amongst others, and a book that I and the other members of our library's book club thoroughly enjoyed. So welcome, Kerri.
Thank you, John. I'm really happy to be here. I just wanted to talk, first, maybe a show of hands if you've read the book or not, so I can know what to express or not. Oh, yay, 2 people in that screen. Okay, so a few people haven't read it, and then there's all these blank screens. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the book, and then I wanted to do a reading that may interest you from the book if you haven't read it. And I would love to talk about it too, because I think it relates to Dover Foxcroft. So Milltown there's a lot of things for those of you who read it. But I would think the central thing it is about identity and how our identity has a symbiotic relationship with place and landscape, meaning that how our landscapes define us, but we also define our landscapes, like if I think about Maine, Maine is in my blood. I don't live there anymore, but it defines me. Like if you even just talk about trees, which are surrounding you, I assume, Maine is 90% forested, right? And I think those forests contribute to the cultural values of people who live there, or people like me who have lived there, like what we do for pleasure and activities. I've skied since I was 4 years old, hunt, fish, boating, camping, all that stuff, outside activities, right? I think the woods also have defined our social lives because, as you know, it's hard to get from one place to another by walking because there's like one town to another, there's not a lot of public transportation. And I think we seek companionship in different ways, like than if we lived in Providence, Rhode Island, or New York City. Culturally, sociologically, I think the Maine woods consists of like 10 million acres where basically nobody lives. And these private lands are in the middle of public parcels and vice versa. It's all kind of complicated up there. And with the ownership changing so frequently, it's hard to know who owns what. But anyway, I just think there's a type of person that is attracted to these landscapes. So even if you were born there and you aren't attracted to it, you left. Or if you moved there, like John has moved there in recent years, it's a landscape that attracts him. So what are you attracted to? It's isolated from urban centers. So I think you have to be creative or you have to make do, which affects how people behave. And I think people there are generally practical, loyal to close friends and neighbors, because like I said, that's the main nut of your social lives, are people, right? There's not giant museums everywhere in the middle of Dover Foxcroft. I think so. We're stubborn because we have to be, because sometimes there's a lot to get done with weather to tend. Anyway, and economically, Maine has always defined us too. The woods have always defined us. I mean, the forests for making ships, masts for ships at first, and then for making paper, and now for making corrugated cardboard. And as those things are going away, so Maine is becoming poorer and poorer. And so that affects us economically too, this landscape, And it's also affected us physically, at least in my town that was nicknamed Cancer Valley. Where a lot of people have gotten sick probably by the pollution from the mill. So anyway, that is one of the things that Milltown is about. I write about, and I wanted to read a little bit, if you don't mind, just like 3 minutes of something I wrote that kind of speaks to that landscape. The Maine woods, the North Maine woods. I'll set it up here. I'm writing about the North Maine woods and Roxanne Quimby in my book. And for those who are following along, it's like page 184, 185. Roxanne Quimby, who knows Roxanne Quimby? Raise your hand. I think she lived there or lives there. Or, yeah. So the owner of Burt's Bees, for those who don't know her. So I'm going to start here. When I first heard about Quimby's idea to make a national park in Maine, I reacted not unlike some people from Maine did. This is our state, not yours. We like the woods just how they were. Thank you very much. We could hunt, fish, snowmobile, hike, paddle, log, ski, camp, and snowshoe with nobody telling us what to do. Even the private landowners who allowed all of those things. Some opponents to her efforts just wanted to live in solitude, telling her to just butt the hell out. And in the independent but self-sabotaging spirit of Mainers, words like federal overreach and ban Roxanne fell into conversations in diners and onto bumpers of pickup trucks across the state. At one point, the town manager from Millinocket wrote a letter to the editor of the Bangor Daily News saying to Quimby, "Leave us and our way of life alone." Other opponents to Quimby were concerned a national park would hurt industries and families that produced Maine's forest-related products, lumber, pulp, furniture, paper, and wood, which comprised the state's largest exported goods. And with 5 paper mills closing between 2008 and 2016, leaving approximately 2,500 folks unemployed, a national park could ruin livelihoods of people halfway ruined themselves. Quimby's acolytes argued a national park would create other kinds of jobs, ones more sustainable than knocking down trees and making them into books. They wanted to keep the forests unanswerable to skidders and other commercial enterprise, except perhaps the business of tourism, which was a pretty lucrative bet. 2017, Maine's national parks will bring in about $285 million. I worked in the tourist industry in Maine in one of my 86 jobs, feeding visitors lobsters. I sold them clothes. I taught them how to ski. So I understood how adversaries saw her as another tourist backpacking in her ideas of what constitutes the essence of Maine and shoving it down our throats. We had lived with a tolerant disdain for tourists, feeling both used and reliant on them, a conundrum we've yet to solve. It was like our codependency relationship with the forest itself. Tourists came, enriched us, and left us with a tenuous economy at the mercy of vacationland whims. Also, their infrequent visits to their often second homes made town centers as sleepy as the dead ache of frostbite. Quimby didn't appear different in principle from paper companies either, who came from away and spent their money and influence to use Maine's resources as they saw fit. Between 2003, when I first learned of her quest, and now, I understand now, which was 2017 or 18 when I wrote this, I understand the issues better. And I grew to see the virtue and value of Quimby's ideas and ideals. My small-mindedness level at tourist was a holdout from my past, a past responsible for ruining the landscape she was trying to protect. I plot her now a little for jamming a crowbar in the center of the state's ambivalence toward outside influence and prying it wide open. Otherwise, who knows what would happen to the woods as long as humans plod the earth. If her national park becomes a success, I also know what tourists can support. Their money paid my college debt as I served them lobster and beer. Plus, I hadn't lived in Maine since 2001. Wasn't I a tourist now too? Just a little bit more and then I'll be done. Though the national park didn't directly affect Mexico, Maine, its potential creation asked questions on familiar themes. Save the environment or save the forest-related jobs? Give the woods to the tourists who propose to guard them, or to the locals who use them for economic prosperity? Do we yield to government regulations or business pursuits? Bloggers, coalitions, environmental groups, tourists, nature lovers pinwheeled-eyed liberals, hunters, hikers, and disenfranchised mill workers, Thoreau, Quimby, we all wanted the same thing. We wanted the woods for ourselves. The unasked question always floating around the national park proposal was this: who can own the woods or nature itself? Could Quimby or the federal government own the moose that wrecked our cars or the old growth trees? I wondered, now, then, think, thought, I now know, knew the answer. The people who own the woods, it's whoever coughs up the most cash. That's it.
That was great. I've said time and again, I'm from away, so I'm not gonna try to take a side on the Roxanne Quimby debate. Perhaps other people in the audience will want to, but I did just want to. One of the things that does come up in the book that, as it relates to this, is just this dichotomy between livelihood and environmentalism, which is it's a balance. It's often we hear arguments on one side or the other, but where do you see like the interplay between those and the intersection between those? Because it's not an all or nothing debate. It has to be, people need jobs, but at the same time we do need to protect the environment. So how do you think Maine has done that in more recent times? If you read the book, a lot of it is not gone so well, but do you think they're doing a better job now, and how do you think that could continue to improve?
I don't know. Yes and no. I mean, I really think Maine has always been it's been a plantation state. It's been used like a plantation since its inception. And I think that it continues to be abused. And I think that people continue to abuse it. But that's also not to say, I'm not one of those people either that thinks you shouldn't have paper making or other industries. I just think there are ways that they could do it to be cleaner and safer. There are ways. I mean, technically and logistically, there are ways. But the problem is, like in Maine, just like most states and most governments, they don't want to put, they're thinking very short term instead of very long term. I feel like they're still doing that. Like, for instance, with Maine, like my book was printed on chlorine-free paper, because when you use chlorine to bleach paper, it creates one of the most toxic chemicals known to humankind. So I had it printed on this chlorine-free paper. Now, if all paper mills in the United States were required, maybe by the government or the EPA, to make this kind of paper, then paper mills would change their processes, right? But right now, they don't want to change these processes because nobody's ordering the paper. It makes perfect sense. It's market demand. But so I think that, it's kind of a chicken egg thing, like what came first or what needs to come first. But I think Maine could do more to, I should say this too, and it's a little irritating to me that, my book has reached Governor Mills, and many people have given it to her. And the one comment that she told somebody was that she didn't really want to talk about my book because she thought it was negative about Maine. But see, that in itself is problematic. It's about her. This book is about her constituents, and it's not, whether it's negative or positive is sort of irrelevant. It's the problems of Maine are outlined in here. So I think that kind of attitude is not the way. And I like her too, but I just think that attitude is not the, to keep ignoring it. And that's what my book is about, is to not ignore things. It's about breaking silences, I don't know if I answered your question, but those are my feelings.
No, yeah, that answered it pretty well. If anyone else has any questions or has anything they'd like to, you can unmute yourself, or you can type it in the chat if you.
Why don't Sarah, you go first? I saw you
Okay.
raise your hand first, and then Cynthia. Can you unmute you?
Sorry.
It won't let, you'll have to unmute her, John, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, also you can hear me now.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we should be good.
Thank you.
Fine.
I haven't read your book, but I liked in that passage how you were even-handed about that issue. that you treated both sides. And would you say in general that that's kind of the way you approach your book? Do you feel like you handle
Yeah,
it that way?
I think what I did was I'm glad you brought that up. I am an outsider and an insider, right? I grew up there. My family still lives there. All my ancestors are buried there. They helped build the state in different ways, but I don't live there anymore. So I think I really tried to look at everything as I was doing it as like I'm close to it, but I'm also distant from it. So that insider outsider thing, and John and I talked about that right before we all met, comes across in almost every aspect of the book. Like in here, like I also don't feel like the book is answers questions. I feel like it's asking questions. It's sort of giving you questions, which I think the best books do. They ask, and then the reader can like look and try to find the answers. And maybe you won't find the answers, but I think it's in the trying to find the answers that you find something. And this book is also that too. It's actually a book about me researching the book in some ways. So you watch me, you kind of follow me through 2000, gosh, what was it? 2009 to 2019. It took me about 10 years. And that's kind of the arc of the book. So you watch me kind of researching. And the main nut of what I was trying to find was why are so many people in my town dying? But the research went off into many directions. Like the cover of the book is this that's the shape of our river. This is right where Mexico is here and Rumford is here and the mill is like right here. So I tried to structure it a little like our river. So if I was researching something and I found something else, I would go down that path like a river would. I would follow the natural inclination of the research. So yeah, what was your question? No, just kidding. So yeah, I think in doing that, in following your curiosity, it's not about finding answers and it's not about coming hard down on one side or the other. And it's the same with the people that appear in this book. I don't judge them either. It's just meet people where they are and meet the place where it is. Who am I to judge? You know, I'm no God.
Cindy, did you have a question too?
She did. Do you have to unmute her too?
Yeah, I made it so that everyone should be able to unmute themselves, but
Oh, there you are, Cindy. You're unmuted.
yeah, Cindy, you're unmuted
Okay.
now.
Okay, just took a couple tries. Thanks, John.
Sure.
Yeah, I think there's just so much here, Kerri. I read it, with the book club, so it's been a few months, but it sat with me in many ways over the course of time, and thinking about it's not like a binary thing, like this is good and that is bad. I thought so much about the way you described the supportive community and your family and growing up in a place where, well, of course, it's a matter of the decades too, because I think everything has shifted and changed since the time that you grew up, and before that, the time that I grew up in Old Town, which is also, dominated by the paper industry. But I really appreciated how you wrote about that. You wrote about your interest in learning about your Acadian ancestry. You wrote about, at the same time, this loving, close-knit community is living its life. It's being destroyed by the mill and those that come later to take the water, Nestle and other companies. And so your reference to Maine being a plantation state, I think, is really of great interest to me, and thinking more about that. The other thing I was also thinking about is since I think there's been a lot of change in the last even 5 years in terms of people's attitude towards Katahdin Woods and Waters and Roxanne Quimby.
I don't know about that. it would be interesting to hear. I don't, that was written in maybe 2017 or 16.
Mm,
So,
mm. But now that people know that the mill is not, I'm thinking of Millinocket now.
Yeah.
The mill is not coming back in the way it was. And it took people at least, I don't know, maybe 2 decades to really come to terms with that. That now people, I think people are slow to embrace change. And maybe that is a main trait. But now, people are innovative and people look and see that this is something for all of us, and that there is economic development happening because of environmental conservation and preservation. So I don't know. I'm just rambling now, except that I think there's your book gives us a lot of wonderful ways to think about our lifestyle here. And I appreciate what you say about you being an insider and now an outsider, which lets you look through a different lens
Sure.
as you look back.
Yeah, and in that lens, it's not good or bad. I just happen to be a writer, so it's that's where it's beneficial, right? And I think, like I was saying, that when you're really close to something, like if you're living there, it's very hard to see. You get a little myopia, but if you're far away, you're not seeing things. Like, I don't really know exactly what's going on in Maine now. People, when if you ask me any specific questions, I'm dealing with my own life here. I just had like surgery the other day, and I have my own life that I'm like living, so I'm not paying as much attention. And my mother, after the book was published, moved from Mexico to Freeport. So if she was living there, I would know more, but now she's in Freeport near my sister. So it's also become further and further away from me, which is it really feels kind of sad, actually, in a way. I feel like it's her leaving there was like a big shift in my connection to home. There's nobody really there anymore. I mean, there are friends, but like, anyway, yeah, the idea about change, there was a part too, if I can find it, it was like a paragraph about Paul Bunyan that I wanted to share too. God, where was that? 275. Okay. I think I have it. You said something and it reminded me. But anyway, while I scatter through that, I should see if anybody else has questions too, or wants to talk about anything, including Quimby or not Quimby. We don't have
No,
to
I was thinking it would be really interesting to hear from Tom and Phyllis, who grew up and spent time in Mexico and Rumford, and speak to their experience too. Right?
Is that you, Tom? Tom's iPhone? Is that who you're talking about? If he wants to, he's muted.
Tom, you're still muted.
Yeah, I've heard mostly positive things from people in Rumford, but there are some people who get mad because they feel like I said bad things about the town, but I don't really feel like I did. It doesn't matter. It's my experience. My experience is one experience. I don't know.
I don't think you said bad things about the town. I haven't read the book, but I've talked to Phyllis, who has, my wife. I taught high school at Mexico for 10 years, 69 to 71 or whatever it was, 79. Okay. I had back surgery in Portland in like 1977. And one of the things, when I was in the hospital, this nurse asked me, like, well, where are you from? I said, Rumford. And she said, well, what are you here for? And I said, well, I'm having a back surgery. And she said, oh, okay. And I said, what did you mean by that? And she said, oh, no, I said, tell me. She said, I just assumed it was cancer because everybody.
Really? Wow.
Yes. And that hit me quite a bit. So I don't know. I'm more of an environmentalist. I had, is she the one that wrote about the doctors? I had the doctor in your book's sons in school.
Oh, the Martins?
The Martins, Barney, and I can't think of the other one's name, but So it was all very close to me. And I know that the mill ran the town and ran even Mexico High School. If you want, it's just, it bugged me how much of a close grip they had on every single thing. For instance,
Yeah.
we would hear rumors about who was going to get fired and et cetera from people at the mill long before, you know, they found out. I mean, it's, and I know
Really?
that,
Wow.
yeah, I loved Mexico, especially for the first 5 years, but I don't know, it was such, it needed help, the whole town.
It's
Phyllis and I
mixed,
used to,
right? I mean,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people have mixed feelings about it, and I think that permeates throughout the state. You know, mixed feelings about living in a place that is also causing so much damage, or
Yeah,
you're not even, or that's so closely intertwined. I mean, like Hugh Chisholm, the founder of our mill, for those who haven't read the book, you know, he created this sort of it's in the book, this utopia, really. He built the churches, the libraries, the schools, the recreation centers, the canals. Like, he built the mill. He basically did everything, and it was seemingly altruistic because, and it was great. You know, people enjoyed. He gave away free turkeys for Christmas, and he gave housing to the mill workers that were really nice houses. So it seemed like a great thing, but what he did, and this is in the book too, is I think he created this dependency that you're kind of talking about on mill and on outside leadership, because he never lived in Maine. He lived on Fifth Avenue in New York City, and he lived in, you know, he had like a fancy farm in Westchester County, New York. But he created a dependency so much that there was a sociologist from New Brunswick who wrote his dissertation about the economic. I have his copy of it here. Actually, I found it in the archives in Rumford. But he wrote a dissertation about the dependency on the forest and the forest-related industries of Rumford, Maine, and how it was so close that, and I think that legacy still is there today with people dependent on outside leadership, even though they may say, you know, we don't want you here, you're an outsider. There's still, you know, Nestle came in and within seconds they were all over it. Oh yeah, you know, no, you know, Nestle is not going to save, you know, it's just jumping from the mill to Nestle it's not going to save this town. You have to think a little more creatively. But I don't blame the people there. I blame it history, you know. And I think our government leadership could step in and say, you know, here's some solutions, instead of saying, let's keep the mill going, because the paper industry is going away in New England. It will go away in the next 10 years. It will be gone. I guarantee. I've talked to paper consultants that said it's on its way out. It's isolated, it's unaffordable, it's high taxes. They can make paper in South America for 1,000,000 times cheaper. So I just think, instead of saying, you know, we support working class workers, which I do too, but like, find something else for them to do. Maybe they can build solar panels, or maybe they could do something else with that beautiful landscape that they live on, you know. Anyway, it's
I just lived
complicated.
there. I just lived there for 10 years. I didn't have a real stake in the area. I was brought up here in this town where I'm living now. But it bothered me. Phyllis and I used to go for walks along the riverbank, and we'd see some wildlife. I always remember the three-legged groundhog. You know, everything looked so crippled there. I mean, it was just an environmentally not a nice place. You know, it's
That's interesting you say that, because I've heard other people say such things, and yeah, I've heard some other stories like that where they've seen wildlife that have been deformed, lots
yeah,
of it, which
yeah.
is really crazy, you know. I mean,
Mhm.
so how could it, you know, and I should tell people in the book, you know, I searched for this connection between, you know, and this is what Tom's bringing up, this connection between pollution and disease, but it's basically impossible to prove, because how do you say, you know, I was born and then I moved, you know, I had 86 jobs, I moved to like 5 different countries, and how do you know that my cancer was, I don't have cancer, but like if I had cancer, how do you know it was from Rumford in Mexico, Maine? How could you know? You know, it's really impossible, because also pollutants don't stay where we with them. Just because the pollutants are in there, they travel downstream and they go into the river and they go into the ocean, they go into the lobster, and they go into somebody in a fancy restaurant in New York City who's eating the lobster. So it's an impossible thing to track, which I guess lends back to what I was telling Sarah about how it's not necessarily balance, but there's no necessarily, and there's not an answer to these things, because this is the kind of sort of environmental disaster that just, there's no beginning and no end, you know? God, I'm like a bad news bear. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Well, that was
I'm saying it with a smile on my face, though.
that was one of the things that I wanted to bring up, actually, was that, you know, when this book actually was brought up, and I forget who suggested it in the book club, I was like, oh, it took me a while to get through nonfiction books. I mean, a lot of times it's just a lot of facts thrown at you. And especially if it's an environmental nonfiction book, a lot of times it is either a list of facts or a list of facts with a political argument behind it. And
Yes.
I started reading your book, and it is something completely different. It's your own personal narrative. It's you looking into your family's history, looking into the history of your town, looking into your own identity. But at the same time, it's weaving in this environmental narrative that it's giving you these facts and these figures and really showing you the full picture. But it's very entertaining. It's not like a lot of other nonfiction I've read. And it's really, I think, a model of how environmental literature and environmental storytelling could be handled. Rather than
Yay.
trying to beat people over the head with facts they're not going to listen to. You could put it in an entertaining medium. So
I couldn't agree more. I'm like so
Yeah.
thrilled. I can't even tell you how happy that makes me to hear you say that. And I know my husband's on here and he knows how happy I am, because this idea about environmental storytelling, I should say to people, I'm, it's contributing editor at Orion magazine, which is an environmental magazine. And I feel very strongly, and I'm also a book critic, so I get hundreds of environmental books a day, and like John is saying, most of them just deliver information down my throats, facts, data, information, and there's no story. So when I say environmental storytelling, it's different than environmental writing because there's a story in it. And I think that's what's missing from all these things. It's almost like the environmental movement itself, an environmental story, is like the worst PR campaign ever, which is why I think it's not getting a lot of, there's not a lot happening. Climate change, everybody's like climate change. Like, how much do you hate that word? I hate it. Climate change, climate change, climate change. Everybody's talking about it, but nothing's happening because it's like the worst marketing campaign ever. Nobody's telling good stories. They're telling, the people with the expertise are just, they're either delivering information or they're shouting about something. It's very angry, or there's the other kind that's like super sad and full of grief. The thing that's missing in all of these stories, and which I tried to contain in mine, is actually love. Like, that's really what is making the world go around. And without love in a story, you don't really have a story. If you think about the best novels you've read, or the best, that's what it needs to contain. And yes, we can care about polar bears or three-legged gophers, but without like humans and love to sort of anchor that, I'm not sure that people are really going to listen. So it's my mission right now to help change that. And that's part of what my next book is about, really, is about environmental storytelling, and looking at it really closely and seeing what's been done, what can be done. And I'm working with Brown University too on a big initiative, perhaps starting an environmental storytelling center where we can take all those scientists and turn them into writers.
Yeah, we have a local author. She lives north of Greenville, Sandra Neely. I don't know if she writes, actually, it's more like it's almost like a detective story, but it's with game warden, and I'm probably going to screw up some details while I'm telling this. But she has a kind of a similar approach, actually, in that she's writing stories about a game warden, and it's action, and it's solving a crime, and it's, you know, very interesting stuff. But at the same time, she's talking about the environmental hazards of screwing up the
I would
ecosystem and taking
definitely
out all the
follow
predators. And she has another book about some of the adverse effects of how they've set up certain windmills and killing bird strikes and putting them in bird corridors. So it is something
And it's
that
just
I've seen a
happening
lot of.
naturally, and it's happening naturally in the story, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just happening. Yeah, there's another book I'm reading that feels like that too. It's called Pig Years. It comes out in June. And this woman's a farmer in upstate New York. She's a great writer, but she's not, it's not on the nose environmental writing. It's just the environment is there in the background happening. Yeah, that's exciting. You'll have to send me her name and details. I'd like to look her up. Maybe teach some of her stories would be great. Somebody had
Patty.
a question there, Patty.
Yeah, I think Patty has a question.
I read something, and I've not been able to find the source again, but it was a piece of research where they took a bunch of people and asked them what they thought about climate change. And then they divided them in half. And half of them watched Al Gore's movie, and the other half watched the movie The Day After Tomorrow, which is a total fiction.
Yeah, it's like a big, crazy
it's like a disaster movie, right?
Yeah.
But you know, the disaster is caused by climate change. And then afterwards, they asked the people again what they thought about climate change. And the people who watched Al Gore's movie hadn't really changed their minds much. But the people who watched The Day After Tomorrow had.
Huh.
And it's fascinating to me to think about it. But what it emphasizes is that it's the emotional attachment to the thing that gets to people, rather than all the, you know, no matter how much you show people facts, they may not change their mind.
Well, we know that from the pandemic, don't we? I mean, no, I'm not saying one way or the other how I feel about it, but I think that is true. It's, you know, vaccines back in the day when we all had our polio vaccine, it wasn't a big deal, but now it's politicized by emotion. That's a really great, I'm going to try to find that study. That sounds really interesting. It sounds really relevant to what I want to write about too. Thank you.
Yeah, I hope you can find it. I really made some effort, and I haven't been able to turn it up, but
well, maybe with the Harvard affiliation, I can find it.
All right.
If I do, I'll send it to John, and maybe he can share it with you.
Yeah,
that would be terrific. That would be
Yeah.
terrific.
Yeah. But
Kerri,
no,
you're
that's
really
exactly
trying to
it.
start. You're
Yeah, go
really
ahead.
trying to start a fist fight in the Zoom. You're bringing up the Quimby's and
The
pandemic
Quimby's
at the
and
same time.
Nestle and, you know, whoever. I mean, that's the fun thing though. I am and I'm not. Like I just think there are things that people should talk about. And you know, you're all from Maine or you live there, and you know how people don't like to talk about things. And I'm here to like just rustle that up. Like not argue about it. Like I have no argument with any of it. I just think people should just start talking about it. And I think somebody said something earlier. It's exactly that you know, our country, I think, has become so polarized that you can't talk to certain people for some reason if you don't agree with them politically. And I'm completely against that. You know, a lot of people in my book, I don't agree with politically, but I don't really care. I mean, I can go have a beer with them and a coffee with them and still talk to them. And we share the love of some things. And I think if you meet people on their ground and not try to convince them of something, this is what I did anyway. I'm not trying to convince them of anything. I'm there to listen. I think listening is a skill that has gone away in our country. And this book is about listening as much as it is about telling a story. Just really listening to what people said about where they live. Sarah's just writing something in the comments. Thank you for answering my question. I would also be interested to hear about your education. Yes, I mean, I can tell you, I went to Beloit College and I studied creative writing and journalism. But then I didn't write anything. I graduated in 1990 from college, undergrad, and I didn't write anything till like 2009. So how many years is that? 1990 to 2009 or something.
19.
Maybe. It's a long time. I did because I had to work. Like I had to pay off my student loans. I had to work, and then the reason, and this is all in my essay that John had referenced. I wrote an essay for the New York Review of Books called My 86 Jobs. And if you want to read that, it's on my website, and it goes through it answers your question exactly about my education and how I got from like Mexico to sort of here. But in the short version is I went to college and I graduated, and it took me 20 years to pay off my loans. And by that time, I was like, I can't be a writer because writers don't make any money, and they still don't. But I happened to marry a man who was in the Coast Guard, so he provided a livelihood, and it allowed me to write, really, and write this book anyway. I mean, I was still working, but not full time. And then I went to grad school at the New School on the GI Bill, his GI Bill, in 2013 to 15. Which really kind of catapulted me into finishing and writing this book and getting an agent and getting a publisher and everything. So if it weren't for grad school and the GI Bill and all that, I'd probably still be like waitressing somewhere, which is fine. I have nothing wrong with that. But that's probably what I'd be doing, or working in the store. Yeah, that's the short answer. But yeah, the essay is complete. It starts with school shopping at age 15 at the Auburn Mall. So I think it's a fun essay you might enjoy. I'll put a link to it in the chat. Let's see if I can find it. But like a very full, there it is.
Yeah, one of the things that all of that brought up was something that I took a note about. It seems like in our modern society, a lot of the emphasis is placed on success and personal success and career success, which if you grow up in a small town almost inevitably means moving away from your small town. And then in a way, when you do that, you almost lose your tether to a community, to your former identity. And it seems like a lot of your book is going back and forth between your identity now and your identity in Mexico. And it's kind of, do you feel that does leave you kind of untethered, or do you feel you have multiple identities? Do you feel you still have one identity just influenced by multiple things? That's something I struggle with myself sometimes, having moved around a lot. So
I think identity, and I think about it a lot, and there's actually there's a chapter too about like addressing that, like about me comparing myself to Lisa Russell, she's in the book and she's a math teacher, and we graduated from high school together. She stayed and I left, so I sort of look at the comparison. But I think identity is like, it's like a snowball. You've got all these things and you're packing it and you're making this tight, like kind of nut, but you can keep adding to it. But it's not just you adding to it, right? Identity it's so complex because it changes constantly. Like when I would go back home, I was the person I was in high school, and people saw me differently. They saw me as that, or maybe they saw me as this other person. So it's also how people see you, or how you feel, or what you think you were. You know what I mean? There's all these kind of iterations that are happening in your mind. But I think identity is not, it's constantly fluctuating, constantly, like minute by minute. So you're never one thing. So I think that me even having all these jobs, it's kind of a continuation of that, really, or me living in all these different places. Like in the book, I go from here to here, and I move from Sweden to like Curacao to Washington, DC. But identity is a complex thing that is constantly changing. And I think if you realize that, then it's sort of easier to be in it. Like you could just accept it instead of, most of us have at one point in our life, I said, who am I? Right. But you're never gonna, it's just like me trying to find the answer to the Mills pollution and cancer. There's not an answer, but you can keep asking the question, because the answer is not the thing that you want. It's the sort of getting there. I know that's really corny, but it's really true. It's that sort of journey. It's the research I did for my book. Like I was telling Sarah, that was the important thing, not the answer. And I think it's the same with identity. It's not who am I? We don't really want the answer to that. I think if you found it, your like head would explode or something. But but it's also what people think of you. Like people think, oh, I don't care what people think. It's not true. Your identity is formed by that in some parts, I'm reading another book right now too that you should all read when it comes out, and it's coming out soon. It's related to that very question. It's called Ancestor Trouble by Maud Newton. It's really, really good. And she through the sort of lens of her family, she does a ton of research about what makes us us, basically, and what makes her her. I love it. Socially, culturally, physically, it's really good.
It's Ancestor Trouble. Is that the name of it?
Yes. Ancestor Trouble, Maud Newton. And she even has the word reckoning. It says a reckoning and a reconciliation. It has very similar themes to my book, but is totally different. Yeah, I like it though. I wish I would have had that book while I was writing my book, is what I wish. But it's coming out in March, I think. March, end of March. I get books early as a book reviewer. That's why I have all these early books.
Yeah, that must be nice.
It's fun, yeah, but it's also overwhelming. Part of my days, I mean, you do it all the time because it's your job as a librarian, but I just sort books daily in my house. They come in, I have like certain bookshelf, they're all over my house. It's like dust mites. I have books. Anybody else have any comments or questions, thoughts, opinions? You want to say anything? You don't even have to have a question. You can just say something.
Did you want to read the other? You had talked about the others.
Yeah, I might read this quick part. Somebody
Okay.
lovingly gave me the page it was on. It's about Paul Bunyan. Do you guys have a Paul Bunyan up there? I know, don't they have one in? Yeah, is it in Dover Foxcroft? Or is it
Bangor,
Old
Maine.
Town?
There's one in Bangor.
Bangor. It's in Bangor. Yeah, we have one too. Everybody has one. But I'm gonna read a little bit. This is I'll just set it up. I was at the funeral home in Rumford, the Meter funeral home, and James Meter was the son about my age, and he ended up being my publicist for my book, which is so strange. Anyway, I was at Arthur and Sheila Meter's house. We were having scotch. I was talking to them about life and death, because that's what he did. He tended to all the people who died from cancer, right? So it was an important conversation. Anyway, I'm going to read after I leave the house. So after I leave Arthur's, you can all hear me, right? Is that good?
Yeah.
After I leave Arthur and Sheila's house, I walk over to the tourist information booth parking lot to see the falls. There's big waterfalls there. Water stampedes over the crisp edge of the dam. Trees along the Androscoggin are still naked in their transformation. A motorcycle growls by. A huge Paul Bunyan statue looms over the river where Bunyan-sized logs once floated downstream towards the mill. In blue pants, a matching blue watch cap, and a short sleeve red polo shirt exposing his brawny arms, Bunyan proffers an equally enormous axe that could clear cut even the Amazon. That statue has been around as long as I remember, although it used to tower above the village shop across the street. I never paid much attention to Bunyan, despite his size. He blended into the background, as improbable as that seems. Small towns from Maine to Minnesota claim Bunyan as their own, yet everyone agrees the boy giant was a hero to all woodsmen. Legend maintains when his cradle rocked, the motion caused huge waves that sank ships. He also whittled a pipe from a hickory tree and could outrun buckshot. Our Bunyan, I learned, was crafted from the mold of the Muffler Man, a giant fiberglass statue held mufflers in his outstretched hand as an advertisement on US byways in the 1970s. The model was a blank slate for whatever fairy tale we chose. No matter the myth, there our Bunyan stands as a guardian for those ambling through the waning mill town of my youth. His shadow sometimes is brooding as the hurtling river beyond. He was overhauled between 2000 and 2002, including a paint job, a new axe, and steel supports secured to a huge block of concrete. To add the new supports, workers had to remove his head and shimmy down his neck. Inside his torso, after they assembled his improved skeleton, workers wriggled up and out of the neck one at a time, like the snakes on a Medusa's head come to life in a lumberjack disguise. Then they reattached his head. In honor of the statue's resurrection, Rumford held a festival featuring a lumberjack breakfast, zip lines running over the waterfalls, a facial hair contest, a flannel shirt dinner dance, and an axe throwing competition. We commemorate resource development and industry with memorials like Bunyan or the marble bust of Hugh Chisholm. That was the guy who built our mill. But we don't memorialize the environmental consequences of their work. We keep those legacies hidden in the earth, invisible to the naked eye. What if we began to enshrine those kind of legacies, the ones that don't want to be found? Here in this spot lies a toxic catastrophe. It would be a sign of something we are not ready to admit. I'd love to see in our tourist information booth some real information, a pamphlet outlining the path of mercury, dioxin, and other toxics that are part of our heritage too. Or maybe an interactive feature like they created for the old man of the mountain, so future generations can see what the world was like before we choked it with garbage that contains the half-life of a zillion years. I wonder what kind of festival we'd have for such dangerous shrines as those, or if we'd bother to maintain their perpetual care as lovingly as we shored up Bunyan's spine. Down at the river's edge, I see Ed Muskie's smaller, more serious memorial of squat dark gray granite. Bookish and 6 feet 4 inches tall, he was a giant in real life, but painfully shy and smart, so smart that as a student he was asked more than once to substitute for his teachers. When I was young, my grandmother Bridget dated Muskie, but I can't imagine the couple. He with his stooped quietness and a card-carrying Boy Scout, and my grandmother, an explosive miniature force like BB shotgun, scattered but sharp all at the same time. And this kind of answers your question, John. This is what I wanted to read. Muskie always saw both sides to every argument, the kind of guy who went hunting as a kid, but would never shoot anything. Chris Matthews of the Sarasota Herald Tribune in 1966 said of Muskie, he did not enter politics to have his sentences appear in the newspaper. He sought election to make the country better. Against a resistant president in the House of Representatives and the industry in action, Muskie helped enact the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act by trying to answer a question he often asked himself. How do you create an environment people can enjoy while protecting it? In Rumford, however, Muskie was no match for the silhouette cast by Bunyan. Both giants memorialized and their acts equally significant. However, one deforested the woodlands and the other tried to reclaim them. The rocky pools on the edge of the Androscoggin spanning the gap between them. And one more sentence here and I'll be done. My father used to make fun of Bunyan and his ludicrous blue hoof prints made by Babe, Bunyan's sidekick Blue Ox, that started at the information booth and colored the sidewalks of our town, the same sidewalks they planned to tear up and replace. The Rumford Selectmen had voted in 2009 to use $6,500 from the Economic Development Fund to create Babe, figuring he would encourage tourists to follow his meandering line around town. But they forgot to consider that there's not much left in town to see but Bunyan himself and the garish blue footprints that end abruptly at Rite Aid. We all have a Bunyan. Yeah, so I mean, I read that because I wonder why we memorialize things like that, but like I actually did a project with the Architect League of New York where I actually came up based on that. I came up with a new tourist information booth map, one I wanted to create, and well, I mean, with ideas. Like I thought I want to dress Paul Bunyan up like Ed Muskie instead of him being Paul Bunyan. Like we should have a giant statue of Ed Muskie because he came from our town and he created the Clean Water Act. Wouldn't that be great? So that was like, these are kind of my wacky ideas in this Architect League project. It's also on my website if you want to look. There's this interactive map. Like I also want to have a giant flashing sign. So when you come into town, it says, this is a toxic, waste site. And it points to where they dispose of all the mill waste. Because I think if you put things like that, they're hard to ignore. And if they're hard to ignore, you have to do something about them.
So a question.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with this book?
Yes, I reviewed it a long time ago when it first came out.
And what are your thoughts about it? Because it's a parallel story, right?
It's parallel in a way. I would say that I love that book. It's great. Monica's a wonderful person. She grew up down the street from me. And it was funny because when I first started writing my book, I saw hers come out and I thought, oh no, how many books can there be about Mexico, Maine? I was like truly horrified. So I didn't read it for a while because I didn't want to be influenced by it. But her story is really about dealing with the death of her father. Whereas my death of my father just sort of happens as I'm working on the book. But hers is really more about that and not about the mill and its environmental problems. And that's fine because that's the book she wrote. Like as a book critic, the main thing I do, I look at book. Go ahead.
Didn't she ask that question? Doesn't she ask the question of, did the mill kill her father?
She doesn't ask the question.
Oh, I think she does.
I don't think she does. Well, I don't know if she does. I mean, I did an event with her and we sort of avoided that. I think she does it in a very, if she does it at all, it's in a very like,
Oh, subtle, yeah.
very subtle way, which is nice. I think it's great. Like it's a different take on, but she wasn't saying the whole time, like my father, I think he died of a heart attack, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In driveway. And
Yeah.
and in my research, I found out that like the toxics that our mill creates can create heart disease like crazy. My father also had a heart disease, and a lot of people in our town had heart disease, a lot of mill workers. But hers wasn't that book. And I think one should always look at the book the author wrote and say, did the author do what they intended to do? And she did, and I did. We just wrote different books. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Hers is just more subtle and really, really more personal. Mine is like a history of the town, and hers is a little bit more of a memoir, I think.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I loved it though. Actually, when I read the first few pages of it, I cried. It was so moving. I was like, oh my God. Yeah.
So it's the same.
Probably the only book.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I think Bobby might have unmuted for a second and then remuted himself a bit ago. Bobby, did you have a question?
Well, I mean, I don't know. It might be a bit too. All right, I'll just go for it.
Just go for
First
it.
off, I'm about a few chapters into your book, and first I just want to say that I really, as John was sort of mentioning before, I really appreciate the prose. I do read some nonfiction and memoir, of course, but I'm very impressed by how it's written and how it does feel like, it's got the prose almost like reading a novel, which is very, very nice. I was going to ask, when you were talking about climate change and kind of it being, you're sick of the term climate change and so forth, it made me think about, I was thinking of Jonathan Franzen kind of coming under fire a bit when he was talking about how perhaps the environmentalists in general are focusing too much on the issue solely of climate change, while perhaps disregarding other things. And then he had that essay, and then he came out with a TED talk about save what you love, and talking about how it might be prudent to look at solving some of these other issues, and that it would be good for the bigger picture in general and so forth. And I was just wondering maybe your thoughts on that idea, if you agree that that's perhaps more looking at the environmental issues in a more holistic sort of fashion, instead of trying to put one direct assault against the idea of climate change.
Yeah, I love Jonathan Franzen. I consider him a friend even. He's a really smart guy. And I think he comes under fire unnaturally so for a lot
I
of
agree.
things. I don't know why, because he's really one of the nicest people in literature that I've ever met.
And a beautiful writer too.
And a beautiful writer, a kind person, and actually quite funny. So whatever he says, I'm in general agreement with. But I didn't follow all of those pieces of that, but I know kind of what you're talking about a little bit. But in general, it's not. Yes, I think. I just think that the climate change story needs a better story, as do all the other stories. Like, I think there's so very few, because really the goal of us storytellers is we want to make policy change, right? Like these kind of stories. Eventually, we're telling a story because we want something to happen, right? So how are we going to reach the leaders that can actually make something happen, or enough people so that there's a critical mass, so you like overthrow the government or something? I don't know, but like how to do that. And like I was saying earlier, I just think there's just it's just such a story that is just so tired already. Even though it's new, we just have to start thinking of new ways to do it. And with Franzen, I feel like that's what he was trying to get at a little bit, maybe not so that like in a different way. But I do think there are tons of environmental. I mean, there's a really great what's it called? Anthology. Sorry, I did have surgery 2 days ago, and I have a lot of medication in my brain, so I'm a little slow. Anthology called Tale of Two Planets that John Freeman edited, which has one of the best collections of stories I've read about climate change, because it's people on the ground where they live, like in all these different countries from all these different aspects, or the people that used to live there, like me, that have going home or whatever. But they're really these stories, like back to what was it Priscilla said, the emotional attachment. Was it Priscilla that said that? Somebody said that. Or somebody did. One of you brilliant people said it. Phyllis, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, in those stories, it contains emotional attachment. And I feel like that's what he was driving at, maybe. Like he hasn't, maybe, I haven't even talked to him about this, but it would be fun to talk to him about this. To try to just move environmental stories. I mean, even the word environmental story, right? It makes you just kind of like roll your eyes, right? And like, I was worried about that with my book. People are going to say, oh, and I think people struggle to pick it up. Some people, and once they do, they realize, oh, it's not that kind of book. But like, how do we even get people to that kind of book? It's just going to take all us writers sort of getting together and trying to move. I don't know if I'm answering any question at all, but I'm just sort of thinking out loud with you here, Bobby.
Oh, no, definitely.
I think I'm in agreement with what he says. Climate change is not the only story. It is the most important story. I would not disagree with that. And I think all stories are sort of about that in a way right now. Like, you know, even if you go into the news and there's something happening, there's some war in the Middle East, it's usually about some kind of resource scarcity. You know, this is what we're facing. These news items are about environmental things. If you dig down into each news item, it ends up being about something environmental. And they're not always climate change, but they're related, you know, like there's like I'm studying some stuff about, you know, Rachel Carson and you know, DDT. Okay, that's one environmental story, but like, why do we have DDT? Well, there's mosquitoes. What's happening with mosquitoes now that climate change is happening? You know what I mean? So that it ends up being there. So climate change is sort of everything's orbiting around, but there's stories that are popping out from there. It could be mosquitoes, it could be paper mills, it could be, but they're all kind of related because, you know, we're not going to have paper mills because of climate change in many ways, you know?
Right.
I could drill down into that and tell you why we're not going to have paper mills, or this book Pig Years, you know, it's about organic farming. I'm sure that connects to climate change. So it's important, but the stories coming out of it are what going to tell the climate change story, not just telling the climate change story. Does that make sense? So if you
Oh,
picture
definitely.
climate change, that's the big story. But all these other ones coming out of it are the things that are going to make us understand climate change.
Mm-hmm.
I hope.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I just think any issue requires, well, let me back up. I was going to say, I work in the field of domestic violence. And so you can quote statistics till the cows come home about 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence, 1 in 6 men, whatever. But until you tell the story of the people or a person, and the same is true with, I think, people who are climate refugees now, or people who live in the, you know, the Arabian Ocean on the islands that are won't be there in 10 years.
Or California.
Those are the stories that make it real for us and make us care about what's happening.
Yeah, we're not data points, you know. People are not really data points, and I think those that you know, the more we can connect to humans, the more we're going to understand. Yeah, climate change is ultimately about humans, you know, and animals, I should say, to creatures that are living. Yeah, so I'm just gonna try to change the world. No, just kidding. Environmental storytelling, at least. Thanks all for reading my book. I appreciate that really a lot. And I appreciate libraries. I love library events because readers come to them. Like people who have read the book or want to read the book or don't want to read the book or just want to talk about books. I love libraries. So I appreciate you guys coming out on it.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming to visit with all of us as well. Does anyone have any more questions for Kerri or anything they'd like to say about the book, about the environment?
Yeah, and if you want to continue the conversation, my email's it's on my website. Feel free to email me. I'll try to email you back as quickly as possible, which is slow these days, but I do email back.
So just before you go, Kerri, what are you writing now? You mentioned it earlier, but what are you
Oh my
working
God,
on?
I'm writing so many things. Well, I'm writing a book review for the New York Times. I'm working on a book about, it's nascent right now. It's spinning around Rachel Carson, environmental storytelling, and the environmental movement. Sort of the, like I was saying, the bad PR campaign that it's been doing, and sort of analyzing all that through maybe cultural criticism and book criticism, even storytelling criticism, with sort of Rachel Carson at the center of it as a biography, maybe. Yeah, it sounds wacky, but that's what I might do. And then I'm also working on a piece about violin bow makers, the guys who make the bows. I always like the underdog. You know, people have always written about the violin makers. what about the bow makers, right? What do you know about them? Nothing. I happen to know one, and I just met up with, he graduated from college with me and lives in France. And when I was just there for 2 months. So working on that too, and then all kinds of other crazy little projects. But those are the big projects looming right now, due dates and things and fellowship applications, and it's constant. Thanks for
Anyone else?
asking.
Any more questions? Any comments about the book? If you want to start an argument about Roxanne Quimby, now's the time.
I
to
love
do
that
so.
nobody argue right now. I mean, I thought
Can I say something real quick about Roxanne, actually?
Oh, Bobby's
No,
gonna
because
start it.
I don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
This is absolutely nothing to do with the whole, once she took over Burt's Bees. This was years before. When I was a little kid, my parents, they started a theater group and did a production of Blithe Spirit. And Roxanne Quimby was in it, playing one of the characters. And that's how I got to know her kids, hanging around at rehearsal and everything. And then cut to years later, and suddenly Roxanne's in the news everywhere. It was so strange because she was very much she was just this nice lady. I could tell a story that's probably not appropriate since I know this is going online, but she's
It might be
but yeah.
taped, so be careful.
but no, that's I with hearing about her, that's what it brought up to me, was just this very interesting woman that I knew when I was a little boy, and her kids, who I
Yeah.
still consider friends.
I mean, I didn't know, I wasn't living in the state when this was all happening, so I was really looking at it from very big distance. But I did feel like a tinge of like, who do you think you are to come into our state? And I still feel it, I use the we in this book a lot, depending on what I'm talking about, because I feel an ownership of Maine too. Just because I don't live there doesn't mean I can't feel that ownership. And I actually had that argument with some people in the book. People would say, well, you don't live here anymore, so you can't blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I can do what I want. I can choose to be part of this state. All my ancestors are buried here. My mother lives here. I've been here. I lived in this state longer than you, like what gives, this is part of the argument about the book too, is like, who is part of that same question, who gets to own the woods? Well, who gets to be, what do you get to call yourself? Are you an Acadian and a Mainer? Like, how do I get to call myself those things? And the book sort of explores that, like how we identify. Like I said, it's about identity. So that too. Yeah, I don't even know how. Well, if I have time, I will look into what's going on at the park, but I haven't had time, believe it or not. I've done like 150 events since the book came out, mostly on Zoom. So.
Anyone else? Any other questions? This has been very enlightening for me. I'm sure we've all enjoyed it. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I kind of wish that we would have gotten more Roxanne Quimby gossip besides what Bobby provided.
I know. I was John and I were looking forward to somebody saying, because I thought, oh, I'll read that part and see what happens. But
since I moved here, it's kind of been like we don't talk about it. It's like very hush hush.
Well, that's the thing, right? That's a Maine thing, John.
Yeah.
Just so you know, people, if it's really, really tense, we don't talk about it. So.
And I think that was some of what was coming up in your Paul Bunyan reading that you were doing, is that there's a very selective kind of nostalgia that we forget that we buried tons of toxic waste there. But man, Paul Bunyan was great back in the day. And I feel like that
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I feel like that's not necessarily just Maine, but I think it's more so in Maine maybe than some other places. It's just.
It feels very tense. That I like your term. What did you say? Nostalgia. What was the term?
Yeah.
Selective nostalgia.
Yeah, like selective nostalgia.
That's a great term because I'm writing it down so I don't forget. I'm forgetting everything. I'm like on Percocet right now. Selective nostalgia reminds me of the part in the book where I joined a Facebook group, and it's about Rumford in Mexico, and it celebrates all these things of the days gone by, the olden days, and which is great because I got a lot of historical reference from photos, people posted stuff. It really helped me in writing the book. So one day I was writing about the paper mill strike that happened in 1986. So I posted a question about hey, was anybody involved in the strike in 1986? And the guy that administered the Facebook site was like, he just deleted my comment and he wrote me a nasty message and he was like, you can't write about negative things on this site. I was like, what do you mean negative things? It's like the strike. I was like, yeah, but that was a historical thing that happened in our town. It was very important. It like changed the whole dynamic of our town. He's like, it's negative. You can't do it. And then suddenly I got banned from the site for a while. And then I got back on the site. He let me back on. Somebody convinced him to let me back on because I really I mostly just looked at pictures and got reference, to write about the town. And then when my book came out, a lot of people were putting it on the page because to them it was interesting. It's related to the history of the town. And he deleted every time somebody posted something about my book, he would delete it. He would delete it. So he was like basically trying to delete history. He was trying to recreate history in his own way, recreate the town in his own image of how he saw it. He thought my book was negative and that it wasn't positive enough. And it was really strange. It was like selective nostalgia. I love that. And I think people do that. And this is just like a weird metaphor for that. Like we can try to see things the way that we thought they were or wanted them to be. But if we really step back and like get that distance, I think it's easier to see things a little more clearly. That's
Well,
it.
before we go, I just have to say, I think Roxanne Quimby is to be admired and she's a hero of mine. She had a very difficult life. Bobby, when you were talking about her being in Blythe Spirit and, taking care of her kids and, she was waitressing, she was living without running water and just an amazing human, I think, who was dedicated for decades to preserve land and went about it very in a determined fashion. And then when she realized that she was just totally alienating everybody, she got Lucas on board to be the liaison and to begin to meet with people in the Katahdin region to talk about really what's happening here. And I think that was just brilliant because he really helped people in the Katahdin region see another way. And so we started tonight talking about change and people being resistant to change. And then there are people like Roxanne and Lucas who are agents of change.
That's why I included her in my book, really, because it was like an example of like, okay, here's something that I felt resistant to at first, but then realizing, it takes a little while. And I think I didn't read the part, but like change comes slow in Maine about the time it takes for a tree to grow to full height, which is about 50 years. Sometimes. But yeah, that's why I put her in the book. It's like change can be, here's an example, change can be good. Let's just like look at it a little bit closer, Maybe the Nestle thing could have been good in a way if they had done it right. Maybe these things could be good, but like, anyway, no, I'm glad you brought that point up. That's a good point. All right, I should go because I'm in a brace that starts right in my rib cage and goes down to my knee and getting a little uncomfortable. So.
Yeah, thanks you for
As you
toughing
can
it
see
out
me
with us,
wiggling
Kerri.
around. I just had torn muscles repaired. That's all. And then I'm in a big cast.
Yeah, treat yourself to a painkiller.
In fact,
after
I
all of
talked to John like just virtually a few hours after my
Yeah.
surgery. I'm not even sure what we talked about, but it was fun.
Yeah, this has been great, and I think we've all really enjoyed it. We've learned a lot. Hopefully, those who haven't read the book will pick it up. We have several copies at the library, so stop in and we can get you one. And
Yeah.
looking forward to the next book that you put out. And apparently, you have two in the works, so both of them.
Be in
So,
touch. I mean,
yeah.
please, Don, it would be great.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you. So thanks. If anybody, like I said, email me if you have any other questions or comments.
Yeah.
And thank you for coming tonight. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Kerri, and have a good night, everyone. See
Thanks,
you later.
John. Thanks for setting it up. Thanks,
Yeah.
Kerri.
Yeah, thank you, John, so much. It was really
Yeah.
lovely crowd. Nice. Thanks, Bobby. I feel fine. I'm fine. I'm just making fun of myself. I am a little tired though.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.